After the First World War came to an end, the political order of Europe and the world entered a period of profound upheaval. Empires that had once dominated the continent, such as Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire, collapsed one after another, leading to a near-complete redrawing of Europe's map. From the ashes of war, numerous new states emerged, but rather than securing lasting peace, this new order was riddled with deep contradictions and instability. As the victorious powers, Britain, France, the United States, Italy, and Japan convened a series of major peace conferences, most notably the Versailles System and the Washington Agreements. At these meetings, they divided interests and imposed harsh conditions on the defeated nations, especially Germany. However, the post-war peace was largely superficial. Even among the victorious powers themselves, serious conflicts over economic interests, territory, and colonies persisted, rendering the international order more fragile than ever. Before the world had time to stabilize, a global economic crisis erupted at the end of 1929. Originating in the United States, it rapidly spread throughout the entire capitalist system. Lasting nearly 4 years, the crisis dealt a devastating blow to the world economy, plunging tens of millions into unemployment, poverty, and unprecedented social discontent. Faced with this economic and social catastrophe, powers such as Britain, France, and the United States chose reform as a means of survival. In contrast, Germany, Italy, and Japan pursued a radically different path, establishing fascist dictatorship, accelerating militarization, and embarking on aggressive territorial expansion in an attempt to escape domestic crisis. As a result, international relations grew increasingly tense. Two opposing military blocs gradually took shape, on one side Britain, France, and the United States, on the other Germany, Italy, and Japan. An intense arms race ensued, signaling the approach of a new global war. In Germany, resentment toward the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, combined with severe economic and social consequences, created fertile ground for the rise of fascism. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, skillfully exploited the German population's desire for revenge, with slogans calling for the abolition of the Versailles System, the restoration of military power, and territorial expansion to secure living space. Hitler gradually consolidated power. After overthrowing the Weimar Republic, the Nazi regime fully fascistized the state apparatus, restructured the economy to serve war preparations, and aggressively readied the nation for armed conflict. By 1938, Germany had become a massive war machine, equipped with formidable armed forces, millions of soldiers, tens of thousands of tanks, and thousands of combat aircraft. At the same time, in Italy, Mussolini built a fascist regime with ambitions to revive the ancient Roman Empire, launching invasions in Africa. In the Far East, Japan also embraced militarism, expanding its war of aggression across Asia. These shared ambitions for domination brought Germany, Italy, and Japan together, forming the Axis, an extremely dangerous military alliance that pushed the world toward the brink of global war. In response to this threat, the Soviet Union regarded fascism as its direct enemy and called for the creation of a broad anti-fascist front. However, Britain, France, and the United States hesitated. While fearing Axis expansion, they were also wary of the growing communist movement. Rather than cooperating closely with the Soviet Union, Western powers adopted a policy of appeasement, hoping to redirect Germany's aggression eastward. This appeasement enabled Hitler to steadily realize his ambitions. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss without encountering serious international resistance. Hitler then exploited ethnic tensions to pressure Czechoslovakia, leading to the Munich Conference, where Britain and France sacrificed Czechoslovakia in exchange for a fragile peace. Hitler's promises were soon broken. In early 1939, Germany occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia, exposing the complete failure of appeasement. The next target was Poland. To avoid a two-front war, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, clearing the way for a lightning attack on Poland in September 1939, officially igniting the Second World War. From that point onward, Europe was rapidly engulfed by war. Germany swiftly conquered northern and western Europe, causing France to collapse in just 6 weeks. However, when confronting Britain, Hitler encountered fierce resistance. The Battle of Britain became Nazi Germany's first major defeat, forcing Hitler to abandon plans to invade the British Isles. Meanwhile, naval warfare and the blockade of the Atlantic also failed to subdue Britain. Although controlling most of continental Europe, Hitler had not achieved a decisive victory. By the summer of 1941, at the height of Nazi power, Hitler prepared for his most reckless move, launching Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, plunging the world into the most brutal phase of the greatest war in human history. As early as the summer of 1940, after France had fallen and most of Europe lay under Nazi control, Adolf Hitler turned his gaze eastward. In his view, the Soviet Union was not only an ideological enemy but also the final obstacle to continental domination. Hitler ordered the High Command to plan a massive offensive aimed at crushing the Soviet Union within a few short months. Before the harsh Russian winter could set in, this operation, codenamed Barbarossa, was Nazi Germany's largest and most reckless gamble. At dawn on June 22, 1941, without any declaration of war, Germany abruptly tore up the 1939 German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact and launched an invasion on an unprecedented scale. More than 5 million soldiers, along with thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces, crossed the border simultaneously, opening the bloodiest chapter of the Second World War. Never before had there been a battlefield so vast, brutal, and existential as the Eastern Front. German forces were divided into 3 main army groups. In the north, troops advanced into the Baltic region, approaching and encircling Leningrad. In the center, the strongest spearhead drove straight toward Moscow, the political heart of the Soviet Union. In the south, German forces, together with Romanian and Hungarian allies, pushed into Ukraine, a region rich in food and strategic resources. The sudden and massive assault caught the Soviet Union completely off guard. Despite possessing large forces, the Red Army was suffering from the severe consequences of political purges during the 1930s. Many experienced commanders had been executed or imprisoned, leaving the command structure disorganized and coordination severely weakened. At the same time, Western border defenses were incomplete, and many units had not yet fully deployed when the war began. Exploiting these weaknesses, German forces fully employed blitzkrieg tactics. In the opening weeks, mechanized spearheads penetrated hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory, repeatedly creating massive encirclements. Hundreds of thousands of Red Army soldiers were captured, and entire units were annihilated. In the north, by September 1941, German troops had reached the outskirts of Leningrad and tightened the siege around the city. The blockade lasted 872 days and became one of the most horrific tragedies in human history, with hundreds of thousands of civilians dying from starvation and bombardment. Yet the city never surrendered. On the Central Front, German forces defeated Soviet armies at Smolensk, Bryansk, and Vyazma. These enormous encirclement battles inflicted catastrophic losses on the Red Army. By October 1941, German armored units were approaching Moscow itself, making the prospect of Soviet collapse appear alarmingly real. In the south, fighting was equally devastating. After a massive encirclement around Kiev, more than 600,000 Soviet soldiers were captured, marking one of the Red Army's greatest defeats of the early war period. By controlling most of Ukraine, Germany gained strategic advantages as well as abundant food and raw materials to fuel its war machine. These successive victories convinced Hitler that the Soviet Union had only weeks left. However, this overconfidence obscured growing dangers. Unlike the European states defeated earlier, the Soviet Union did not capitulate. Despite immense losses, the Red Army and Soviet people resisted stubbornly, gradually prolonging the war. By autumn 1941, German command decided to deliver a decisive blow against Moscow, believing that the fall of the capital would collapse Soviet authority. Contrary to this expectation, Stalin and the Soviet leadership remained in Moscow, personally directing the defense and providing immense psychological strength to the population. Two major German offensives in October and November 1941 failed to break Soviet defenses. When the Russian winter arrived, the balance shifted. Temperatures fell to -30, even -40 degrees Celsius, freezing German weapons and vehicles, while soldiers lacked winter clothing and supply lines collapsed. In contrast, the Red Army, accustomed to winter warfare, was better prepared in both equipment and experience. In December 1941, the Soviet Union launched a major counteroffensive near Moscow. Red Army forces pushed German troops back hundreds of kilometers. The victory at Moscow not only halted the German advance but shattered the myth of blitzkrieg invincibility, marking Hitler's first strategic defeat on the Eastern Front. In 1942, recognizing the danger of a direct thrust at the Soviet center, Hitler shifted strategy southward. The new objective was the oil-rich Caucasus, especially Baku, vital to Soviet war production. On this route, Stalingrad became an unavoidable focal point. From the summer of 1942, Stalingrad turned into a living hell. The city was reduced to rubble by bombing. Yet the ruins became natural fortifications for the Red Army. Every street, factory, and wall became a battlefield. The struggle for every meter of ground reached unprecedented levels of brutality. In November 1942, as German forces bogged down in urban fighting, the Soviet Union launched a strategic counteroffensive codenamed Operation Uranus. Attacks from both flanks rapidly closed a ring around Germany's 6th Army. Completely encircled and cut off from supplies, German troops gradually collapsed in the brutal winter. In early 1943, more than 90,000 German soldiers, including Field Marshal Paulus, were forced to surrender. The defeat at Stalingrad dealt a crushing blow to Hitler's prestige and marked a decisive turning point in the war in Europe. From this point onward, the strategic initiative shifted to the Red Army. Meanwhile, in North Africa, fighting was also intense. Initially, German-Italian forces under Rommel had placed British troops under severe pressure. But by late 1942, with increasing U.S. involvement, the Allies achieved a decisive victory at El Alamein, opening the path for a counteroffensive across the Mediterranean. Alongside events in Europe, Japan expanded the war rapidly in Asia-Pacific. After years of aggression in China, Tokyo chose direct confrontation with the United States. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shocked the world and brought the U.S. formally into the war. Exploiting early advantages, Japan launched swift campaigns, seizing Southeast Asia and large areas of the Pacific, creating an empire of unprecedented scale. However, this rapid expansion also exposed fatal weaknesses in logistics, administration, and resistance from occupied peoples. Above all, the shock of Pearl Harbor united the United States as never before. A vast industrial military machine began to operate at full capacity, signaling that the world was entering the decisive phase of the global conflict. Thank you for watching the entire video. If you found it interesting and meaningful, please like and share it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest videos.